Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo! It's time to drive Steens Mountain. Good old Oregon. It's known for the Willamette Valley and the coast. But out here on the eastern side of Oregon, there's a big hole that I always thought was just filled with desert. Lordy, was I ever wrong about that. There's some great country just waiting for a little 1 or 2 or 3 day drive right in our back door. A good excuse to go adventuring in this country is driving to the top of Steens Mountain. These Steens Mountains are the ones that you see off to the west as you drive from Winnemucca to Jordan Valley. Getting to the top of Steens Mountain itself can be rather difficult because of snow. For that reason, I decided to go in July of the year 2008. On past episodes of Drive Steens, we've enjoyed Gentura, we spent a night in Diamond, and then we went driving up to Steens Mountain and down a very rough road on the way back. From there, we had lunch at Fields, and then we went on and almost ran out of gas before the gods of gasoline saved us at Adele. What a foolish thing to do, something I had told myself I would never do again once I was past my 20s, but being a guy, it seems that I have to make a fool of myself every once in a while. Thank goodness I didn't have to walk. From Adele, we went down and explored the lovely little town of Alturas, and then headed back to Cedarville. From Cedarville, we set out on a 60-mile jaunt across a little dirt road that cuts across the very northwest corner of Nevada. We got back to Highway 140 and the wonderful paved highway. We then headed toward Deneo Junction, and we got distracted at Dufarina Field Station, which is a part of the Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge. After passing through Deneo Junction, we headed up to Fields, where we spent a night in the lovely little hotel. We had a good breakfast the next day. We discovered there was a flat tire, which we filled up and decided, it's not going flat very fast. We'll just head off across the desert and check out Alvord Desert. On our last adventure, we went and we saw beautiful Alvord Desert, and we saw the backside of Steens Mountain. Just to the north of Alvord Desert, we came across the Alvord Hot Springs. The great little hot springs with very private dressing areas, with a variety of pools, and some lovely views. Today, we're continuing our journey driving north on the little dirt road through the valley that goes on the east side of the Steens mountain range. The Steens Mountains reach a mile above us as we go along the floor of this valley. One of the things that caught my eye were these little rows of trees out in the middle of nowhere. It didn't take much to realize these trees followed streams that came down from the mountains as the snow was melting. We were here in the second or third week of July, so these streams still had some water in them. Looking back at Alvord Desert, Steens mountain itself, we look back on the area that was drained by the stream that we just crossed. And having passed one place where the stream was coming out of the mountains, we head north and see in the distance yet another stream coming out into the valley. A little panoramic suite to the north, the east. To the south and the Alvord Desert. And to the west. Obviously a little spring, being forced up from the pressure of the water coming down from the top of Steens Mountain. Here we've gotten to the northeast side of Steens Mountain. And so today We leave this episode of Drive Steens here where this beautiful little stream crosses the road, and we find Alvord Ranch. Next time on Drive Steens, we will continue our journey north from Alvord Ranch. Yes, kids, it's time for He's a Guy. He's a Fool. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. Just listen up, and you too will learn how you can not juggle balls, how you can drive yourself nuts spinning in circles. He's a guy, he's a fool. Simple lessons so you can become just like your beer drinking guide to the Great Wahoo. Today's amazing episode of He's a Guy, He's a Fool involves our friend, the squirrel.
Well, it turns out I'm one of those darn fools who tries to keep squirrels out of a bird feeder. I know, insanity, but some of us try it. I built a bird feeder out of stained glass years ago, and squirrels, I don't really care if they get in the bird feeder and feed. The problem is that their little claws really tear things up, and my bird feeder probably wouldn't last for more than a couple of weeks with a squirrel enjoying himself to the feast. So I actually came up with something rather effective. I took a lid from a garbage can and I painted it up a little bit. I put it over the bird feeder, and the lid, the squirrels will not let go if they don't have a grip on something else. And because the lid would flap around, they just would always back off. And for about 15 years, I was able to congratulate myself on having outwitted the squirrels. And believe me, that's a pretty good thing to be able to congratulate yourself on. Well, just this year, some squirrel, there's a new breed of squirrel. They've been breeding around and improving themselves, and I finally found a squirrel on my bird feeder. I don't know how he got there. I was stumped. After all this time, some squirrel had figured out how to get there. So I watched, and he had found a way to hang on to the chain that was holding the feeder up and grab the edge of the feeder and swing himself under and get into the feeder. I was quite impressed. I was also not all that happy about it. So I went to the store and I found a pan that is made to go under hot water heaters. It was substantially larger than the trash can lid, so I put that over my bird feeder, thinking, well, okay, maybe this will stop him. I'm pretty sure it will. Well, the problem with that pan is that it had a little lip on it, and it didn't take but about a week and a half for that squirrel to figure out he could grab onto that lip, swing under there, and get at the bird feeder. Well, I was not all that happy, but it turned out that my neighbors had thrown out a very large, I don't know what it was used for, but it was a big piece of metal that was just the right thickness. It was a great piece of metal. I disassembled it from the, I don't know, the bin or whatever it was the bottom of, and I fixed it up and I put a hole in it and I put that over. Well, it was much, much larger than even the bin had been. So for about 4 weeks, I was able to get by without having a squirrel in my bird feeder. Just the other day, in fact, it was just about Christmas, I think, I went out and I just happened to glance out in my backyard, and there was a squirrel on the bird feeder. Well, I was so upset. I can't put anything bigger over it. It's got too big a thing on it now. So I did the logical thing and I became a complete raging lunatic. I went on the back porch and I grabbed my old utility broom and I snuck out as quietly as I could. And of course by then the squirrel was looking at me, but it was kind of an awkward little spot there, so he wasn't in any hurry to change. He was checking out and seeing what I was doing. And I kind of walked nonchalantly over until I was within range and started at him, and he figured out that I was coming at him, not at anything general, and I was just livid, and I was taking that broom and I was screaming, "You blankety blank blank, don't you ever," and I reached up and I didn't really want to hurt the guy, but I sure wanted to make an impression on him. So by then he had turned around and was jumping off, so I smacked the place he had been with the broom just as he jumped off, and I yelled and screamed, and I was running after him with the broom in the air, and I was kind of caught between wanting to just smack him with the broom and not wanting to hurt him. So I was carrying on real good, and I ran up behind him, and I smacked the fence behind him as he ran up the fence, and I smacked the tree behind him as he ran up the tree. I was a raging lunatic. Well, I thought, hopefully that'll do the trick. But of course, I wasn't fooling myself or anyone else. Nothing stops a squirrel once a squirrel figures out where free food is. Squirrels are kind of like the rest of us when it comes to that. It would be like, it would be like trying to keep a beer drinking guide to the Great Wahoo away from free beer. So, I wasn't too surprised when I looked out a little while longer, and here was the squirrel once again in the bird feeder. Well, I didn't know what to do, but in the meantime I thought, maybe if I can smack him a little bit, he'll learn. But of course this time, by the time I was close to the door, the squirrel had figured out that I was probably not going to be his buddy on this, and as I was running across the lawn, he jumped on the tree and started running up the tree. So I smacked the broom on the tree, and I was yelling and screaming and making a complete fool of myself. And as he ran up the tree, I threw the broom up in the tree. I'm sure that squirrels very seldom have things come after them once they're in the tree. And I think it did kind of startle him, and he ran further on up into the tree, and the broom was sailing through the air, and it was coming back down through the tree, and I thought, it's going to come back down through the tree. I mean, it could get hung up, but what are the chances? Famous last words. Of course it got hung up. It was sitting there in the crotch of the tree. The handle fell over into the one spot where a branch would catch it, and there it was, way, way, way up in the tree. So, to top the whole thing off, and to prove just how logical I was, I yelled up at that darn squirrel. I says, "And now look what you've done!" Well, I was later able to get out one of those long poles that you use for getting branches and limbs off, and I was able to get the broom out of the tree. But it does just prove one thing. When it comes to trying to keep squirrels from doing anything you don't want them to do, you might as well just not try. It only makes a dang fool out of you. In fact, a raging lunatic out of you. And it only amuses the squirrel.
Here it was. Valentine's Day was coming up, and good old guy Howie just hadn't had a date in the longest time. Much to his surprise, he went to a friend's Valentine's party, and there was the girl of his dreams. Obviously, Cupid was on his side, and things were going to get better. So he sauntered on over and introduced himself, and he hummed and hawed and kicked the wall a couple times and tried to find something fun to say, and she seemed to be having a good time. She seemed to be enjoying it. Of course, there was only one thing on his mind, and finally he just couldn't think of anything else to say, so he asked her, "Well, do you mind if I ask you a question?" She replied, "Well, yeah, actually I do, but I can tell you're going to ask anyway, so go ahead." Well, Howie knew it wasn't cool, but he just couldn't stop himself. He couldn't think of anything else to say, so he says, "Well, how many men have you slept with?" She turned to him and she says, "I'm not telling you that. That's my business." Howie perked right up and said, "Oh, cool. How much?" And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo!